I'm Soledad O'Brien. Welcome to Matter of Fact. It is one of the most problematic urban housing issues, and it's sweeping the country. Areas once deemed too poor to be worth the investment are rebuilding and gentrifying. With that redevelopment, affordable housing becomes unaffordable for the people who are already living there. And poor to working class families get pushed out to make room for newcomers with larger salaries, which drives up the cost of living. The city of Louisville is hoping to improve one of its most historic districts, but without displacing the people who already live there. It is an audacious experiment, but can it work? Over the next 2 years, we'll track the progress to see how that mission is unfolding. Here's my first look at the Russell neighborhood in West Louisville, Kentucky.
The neighborhood was really vibrant. It wasn't as dilapidated. Still had a lot of old homes were still here.
Haven Harrington's family goes back more than 3 generations in West Louisville. He lives and works as a radio talk show host in Russell, the neighborhood where he grew up.
This is the infamous 9th Street divide. During the urban renewal, they made this boulevard here that separated West Louisville from downtown Louisville.
The divide was the result of a 1960s urban renewal project that split the community by race. It also leveled entire city blocks, including the thriving African American business district on Walnut Street. Haven's beloved Russell neighborhood, known as the Harlem of Louisville, was decimated. For decades to come, the banks also engaged in redlining, literally drawing red lines around communities they considered too high risk to offer loans or insurance, communities that were mostly African American. Louisville's former mayor, Charles Farnsley, laughed when he described the motive behind the so-called renewal project.
Their motive was, as they told me, to drive the Negro back from the central area. They felt that way downtown wouldn't become the Black Belt. It was a childish idea because the streets are still open, and it was a cruel thing. And urban renewal was called Negro removal by the Negroes, and that's what it was. It almost always tore down the homes of black people or poor people.
Today, a new renewal effort is underway, this time one that aims to include African Americans in the recovery. The project, called Russell, A Place of Promise, leverages $867 million to revive that neighborhood, just west of Louisville's bustling downtown. Sadiqa Reynolds, president of the Urban League, has raised about half of the $35 million to build an indoor track and field facility.
Why did you pick this spot?
Well, to be honest with you, I feel more like this spot picked me. This community deserves this. We deserve to have an opportunity to live in the place where we have really suffered and sacrificed, to watch it grow and watch it become something better.
Still, there is mounting anxiety over whether improvement will lead to gentrification, which displaces the people who already live there.
You know, it's about who gets empowered, who benefits from the investment. Do those investments come into the hands of those folks who really have a connection to that neighborhood historically?
Kevin Fields, who leads the Louisville Central Community Centers, is pushing developers to include community input.
Do you feel like the developers are listening to the people?
I mean, we have to advocate, agitate, and make sure that our voice is being heard and that we're being taken seriously.
Did it get ugly?
Well, we've worked with a group of pastors, the concerned pastors of Russell, and because of the faith-based leadership, it probably didn't get as ugly as it could have gotten.
Lord, we ask you now to bless this church, this community.
Reverend Jeffrey Ellis is one of those pastors. He ministers to the people of Russell, where 60% of the nearly 10,000 remaining residents live below the poverty level.
You don't want this neighborhood to change?
I want it to change for the best. I want it to have the resources it needs to be a developed neighborhood. I don't want it to be underdeveloped. I don't want it to be under-gentrified. I want it to be a part of a larger community, which is Louisville.
Teresa Zawacki and Anthony Smith are with Russell, A Place of Promise. It's nice to have you. So, Teresa, let me start with you. There are so many cities where gentrification is a really, really big problem. Is it just intention that's enough to make sure that people don't gentrify the locals out of their homes, essentially?
It would be great if it was that easy, Soledad, but really it takes more than intention. The idea that there's goodwill behind investments that are being made in communities that haven't seen investment in many decades. It takes really going to the community and immersing yourself in conversation with residents to understand how they interact as part of their community and what their hopes and dreams are for staying in the neighborhood, for becoming owners of assets and taking advantage of the things that are being brought through outside investment to the neighborhood.
It's interesting you mentioned ownership and assets, and often I think conversations about gentrification don't talk about owning stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's the big part of when you think about Russell, a place of promise. It really is how do you invest without displacement? And how do you allow the families who have held the neighborhood down for so long to benefit from that, right? And as Teresa said, also making sure that what comes into the neighborhood is what they want in the neighborhood and what they're going to participate in, making sure that ownership stays in with community and they have a real say in what it looks like as it's built out.
Well, we know if the trajectory of Russell is going the right direction, within 2 years, do you think?
This is a long game. This is not a quick results kind of initiative with Russell, a Place of Promise. This is really looking at the trajectory of individuals as part of families and as part of generations that can stay in place and become owners of assets in the neighborhood. So in 2 years, we'll see some change, but the real game changer is what happens when those families start to pass on those assets to their children or to their grandchildren. And how do we see generational increases in wealth and ownership pass along the way in Russell?
If you're successful, do you see this as a model for the rest of the country, which I think really does struggle with this exact question? How do you improve, how do you bring in grocery stores and more services and better housing and not kick everybody out who was there and has been there for a long time?
Right. One of our goals is to document and to create metrics around everything that we're doing, from community engagement to developing homeownership opportunities and business opportunities for people, because we do see that other cities have these same kinds of situations in neighborhoods, and we think that Russell, a Place of Promise can be a model for other cities and communities struggling with issues of investment and displacement.
Teresa Zawacki and Anthony Smith, nice to have you guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.